Hey, hello, and welcome back. We're going to do a check-in on see how some of the rye was doing that we planted at different times this winter. I'm going to show you a field here behind me that was planted at the end of November. We're going to look at some planted at the beginning of October, as well as some that we planted in January and even the beginning of March. So let's take a look and see how this rye, different planting dates, is doing. Today is April, I believe it's the 17th or 18th, somewhere around in that range. So let's take a look and see how this rye looks at the different times we planted it this year. So if you watched my other video, this was the field that was planted right around Thanksgiving of last year. So that November 25th, 24th, whatever it was this last year. If you saw the other video that I put out a couple weeks ago, that was in February. You could barely see anything coming. Now it is April. We just had a week of 80-degree weather, which is really abnormal, but you can see this rye has really taken off. It's growing nice and tall. We got probably, I'd say there's probably close to 6 inches of growth from the ground to the top there. Nice green fields. In this area, planting, there's a few people that put a few seeds in the ground in this warm spell, but in general, planting usually starts around the April 20th. So if you're going to be a typical farmer in this area and you threw some rye seed in the end of November and you're getting close to planting, this is what it will look like. So we'll go over and look at some of the other fields that we planted at the beginning of October, and we'll check out some that we planted in March and January as well, just to see what difference it makes planting cereal rye cover crops at different times of the year. All right, it's a little bit later in the day. I am here in the field that was planted the beginning of October. So we were just at the field that was planted near Thanksgiving, end of November. This is what 2 months difference in fall planting can do. You see, just looking over the field, it is much further along. This rye is quite tall. It's even further along with maturity. Let me pull some out here. You can see it is starting to just get really tall and grow a lot more vigorously. This rye here is probably a good foot tall, I would say. And I think you might remember last video, if you happen to watch it, I was very hesitant that this rye, even though it was planted heavy enough, could be used in a roller crimp situation. And I still would have mixed feelings about that. If we just look down, there's a lot of areas here where sunlight could get through. Now, yes, we do have corn stalks in here that would act as some mulch that would prevent some weeds from growing. But there's also areas here where there is, winter annuals that have gotten started already. Those wouldn't be too big of a concern for me. But there's just a lot of open space. And it could be, we are still middle of April. These could easily get a head start on any other weeds and get a good canopy, but I would be very hesitant. I would for sure want to wait to make a call until probably another 2 weeks or so into May, just to see if it's actually going to be a good enough stand that would crimp well in terms of being thick enough to be a good weed suppressive mat. So you can see this is the difference, though, between getting rye in beginning of October versus end of November. With this situation, even though I'm a little bit skeptical, and like my last video, maybe if we would put a little bit of fertilizer down, it would help with some of the vigor of this rye getting started well. If you're able to get that rye in earlier, you have an opportunity to do a crimping situation, a no-till soybean with the crimping. The other thing that I found interesting here, it doesn't show up on camera very well at all, but there is a height difference here between the rye over here and the rye over here. And the main difference, you can kind of see here, it's just a little bit shorter. You can see more of the corn stalk sticking through versus that over there. I think the main difference here is rye variety. that the rye on this side, well, there could be two things. I'll be honest, there could be two things. The rye on this side, this is tilled. We'd worked this ground before seeding the rye, and right over here, we had not. This is no-tilled rye. So it could just be the difference of tillage that makes this rye that much more vigorous versus the no-till. I don't know if that has to do with the warmth of the soil or just soluble nutrients that happen when you have tillage going on. The other option could be is that somewhere in here we have two different varieties of rye. I know on this side we would have ND Gardner rye, which we've used before in our trial last year. I really like ND Gardner rye. So we actually kind of ran out of some of that seed when we were planting this field. And so a lot of this here that was planted, you know, a day or two later is actually, I believe it's Hazlitt rye that we got from a neighbor. And so, you know, without actually knowing for sure if it's variety or if it's field condition, it's hard to say what's causing that difference. But there is definitely a height difference here. And it just doesn't show up on camera very well. But the rye on this side is definitely a lot shorter, probably by about, I would say it's, well, let's pull some out here. So we've got, that's the shorter stuff. And then we go over here just a little bit and pull out some longer stuff. That's your height difference. Whether that is variety or planting condition, I cannot say exactly, but there is a height difference in this field. So for sure, I would be very skeptical about doing a roller crimp in this part of the field. This area over here, and actually over there, we have some that we had tilled before we planted as well, would be much more likely candidates for a roller crimp situation. This in the middle, I am not as sure about. If we wanted to maybe increase the odds that we could get some spring fertilizer on, that would probably help. But we're not exactly sure that that's what we're going to do with this field. I'll keep you updated on that. We'll have to see how the spring goes. So this is just two examples. I have a third field I'm going to show you though. So we're going to go over and look at a third field that I didn't show you before because it was middle of February and nothing was happening, or nothing worth showing you. And this field, we had thrown some seed out. We had drilled some seed in January, I believe it was. And then I'd also broadcast some seed in March. So we'll go over there and see what difference it makes when you plant that late into the winter. And now that it's middle of April, I just want to show you, again, looking at different planting dates for cereal rye. So let's go look at that field. All right, I really want to show you this field. This is an interesting one. This rye, we had some of it that was drilled January 14th, and then we had some that was broadcast March 20th, 21st, somewhere in there. So let's take a look and see just how late you can plant cereal rye in the middle of winter. All right, we'll start here. You can see we've got our rows. It's coming through. It's not super far along, but there's definitely rye there. This was January 14th, middle of the winter. Yes, it was a lighter winter, not nearly as frozen as some winters, but it's still winter. I mean, we still had snow, we still had freezing temperatures. And then if we come right over here next to it, it doesn't look like there's very much there, but if you get a little closer, you can see that there is rye coming. It was broadcast less than a month ago, so March 20th, and there's some rye. Now the germination rate is not nearly as high, but that could also be that maybe you know, this was just done with a fertilizer bug. You can come over here and it's a little bit thicker, that maybe the spread pattern isn't that good, and it might be that the rate was not as high as what we drilled it, just because I was trying to set the end gate of the fertilizer buggy. So you'll notice here too, we have very few corn stalks in here. This cornfield, we took the corn stalks off to use as bedding for the dairy, and then this section here, actually, we did inline rip as well, try to address some compaction issues that we had. But if you look at it maybe even a little bit closer here, next to this ragweed that's decided to start growing, Let's pull this rye out, and then we'll come over here to the rye that's drilled, and we'll lay it down next to this other ragweed that's growing. There's a little bit of a difference there. So we have our March seeded rye and our January seeded rye. But really, it's not that big of a difference. Not that big of a difference in the height of rye. Now, what will this rye do in another 2 or 3 weeks? I don't know, we'll have to find out. Obviously, the rye is not going to be nearly as tall and vigorous as that field that was planted in October. And obviously, we have very little, if any, erosion control with the rye that's growing there. But it is putting roots into the ground. It is collecting solar energy. It's doing something. We're going to hopefully take this field and put soybeans in it. Our hope is that the rye will be able to put a little bit of its allelopathy, the natural chemicals that it puts out through its roots that inhibit weeds. We're hoping it's going to do a little bit of that. And this field is probably going to be maybe not our latest planted field, but it'll be a little bit later. It won't be our first one. So that should give the rye a chance to grow. Honestly, this rye is probably going to grow for another month maybe before we terminate it. It'll just depend on the type of spring that we have. So in a month it could grow pretty good. If you actually look out across the field here behind me, so we have some areas that were broadcast, and then way on the far end of the field we had some other areas that were drilled, and then in the middle we have some that has no rye on it. I still have some rye seed left. I am very tempted just to throw it out here and just to have something growing rather than just bare soil. I've got the seed bought anyway. Might as well do it. I've been a little bit busy and we've been kind of wet to get it on. And that's partly why I broadcast, is because it was too wet to drill it in, but we had a little bit of an opening, so I took the fertilizer buggy out and just threw some seed on because the drill wasn't going to work in the mud. So that's what it looks like to plant rye at different times in the winter. So you saw some that was planted around Thanksgiving, how it was doing. You've got this that was planted in the middle of winter, even into early spring. And then you've got the stuff that's already jointing really well that was planted beginning of October. So just a little bit of some things for you to consider. You can plant rye almost any time. Obviously, if you're in North Dakota and you've got 2 feet of snow, you can't plant it. But if you have an opportunity and there's some dirt poking through, you could probably plant rye in the winter if you haven't yet. So we'll follow up with this again in another few weeks as things warm up a little bit, see how the rye takes off. And we'll follow along and just, see what difference it makes when we actually get to the point where this rye would be terminated in our system. So thanks for watching. Give a like and subscribe if you'd like to see some more content. We'll keep these informational videos coming as the opportunities arise. Thanks.